Ambassador Vec pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold metal of the observation window. Below him, his beautiful homeworld of Kelvara Prime was dying. The crystal spires that had stood for 10,000 years were crumbling into dust. Where lush purple forests once swayed in the gentle breeze, now only gray ash remained. The Ravager horde moved like a living carpet across the planet's surface. These weren't just insects, they were something far worse. Each creature stood as tall as a Kelvaron, with razor-sharp mandibles that could slice through reinforced steel. Their black carapaces gleamed with a sickly oil that made them nearly immune to energy weapons. But the worst part was their intelligence. These weren't mindless beasts. They planned. They coordinated. They enjoyed the hunt. Vec's communication. Officer, a young female named Sela, approached with tears streaming down her blue-scaled cheeks. Sir, we've lost contact with New Kelvara. The entire colony, gone. That's 12 worlds now. 12 worlds. 40 billion souls. All consumed in less than 6 months. Vec walked slowly to the central communication array. The massive device hummed with power, capable of broadcasting across half the galaxy. This would be their final message. After this, they wouldn't have enough energy left to power their defenses for more than a few days. Begin recording, he said quietly. The red light blinked on. Vec straightened his ceremonial robes and began to speak. His voice echoed through the empty command center where hundreds of officers once worked. Now only a dozen remained. This is Ambassador Vec of the Kelvaron Republic, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Our civilization is facing complete extinction. The species known as the Ravager Horde has consumed 12 of our worlds. Our military forces have been overwhelmed. Our defenses have failed. He paused, watching another explosion bloom on the planet's surface below. Another city, another million lives. We are a peaceful people. For 8,000 years, we have never waged war against another species. We have shared our knowledge freely. We have offered aid to those in need. We have never asked for anything in return. His voice cracked slightly. Today, we ask for help. We offer our entire national treasury, 5 million pure energy crystals, enough to power a fleet for decades. We offer our scientific knowledge, our star charts, our manufacturing capabilities, everything we have built over millennia. Sela looked up from her console. Sir, we're detecting 17 different species, monitoring this frequency. The Vorthan Empire, the Crystalline Confederacy. They are any responding? Vec asked. No, sir. They're just, listening. Vec nodded grimly. He had expected this. The galaxy was full of civilized species, but they were all cowards when it came to the Ravagers. Everyone knew the stories. The Ravagers didn't just kill. They consumed everything. They turned entire ecosystems into hive material. They bred using the bodies of other species as hosts. The great powers of the galaxy had all tried to fight them at one time or another. The mighty Vorthan battle fleets had lasted 3 days. The Crystalline Confederacy's planet-killing weapons had barely slowed them down. Even the ancient ethereals, with their reality-bending technology, had simply fled to another dimension rather than face the Horde. Complete the message, Vec said. We ask any species capable of military assistance to respond. We will transfer ownership of our crystal reserves immediately upon arrival. Please, our children are dying. Our culture is being erased. If you have any compassion in your hearts, please help us. The transmission ended. The red light went dark. For 3 days, silence. Vec barely slept. The Ravagers had consumed the southern continent and were working their way north. Refugee ships arrived hourly, packed with survivors. Soon, there would be nowhere left to run. On the 3rd day, Sela burst into his quarters. Sir, we have a response. Vec rushed to the communication center. Static filled the speakers. Then a voice emerged. Human, male.com. Kelvaron Republic, this is the Terran Defense Corps. Message received. Assistance en route. Estimated arrival in 72 hours. Hold your position. The transmission cut off. Vec stared at the silent speakers. Terran Defense Corps. Sela, run a database search. Minutes passed. Nothing, sir. No record of any species called Terrans. No known worlds in that sector of space. What sector did the signal come from? The Outer Rim, sir. Grid section 847. That's Deathworlder territory. A chill ran down Vec's spine. Everyone knew about Deathworlder space. The region where evolution had gone mad, where planets spawned creatures so violent that they killed each other for sport. No civilized species ventured there, sir, Sela whispered. What if we just traded one monster for another? The space around Kelvara Prime suddenly filled with ships that seemed to tear reality itself. No elegant emergence from hyperspace like other species used. No gentle deceleration. The human vessels just appeared, as if the universe had been ripped open and these metal beasts had crawled through. Ambassador, that counted 37 ships through his observation scope. They looked nothing like the sleek, artistic vessels he was used to seeing. These were functional, brutal. Each one was covered in scars from previous battles, with patches of different metals welded over holes. Weapon turrets sprouted from every surface like metal thorns. By the ancestors, whispered Sela, his communication officer. They look like they've been through 100 wars. The largest ship was a massive rectangular block of gray metal. No curves, no decoration, just efficiency and firepower. Vec had never seen anything so ugly or so terrifying. A small transport detached from the flagship and approached their station. Vec hurried to the docking bay with his remaining council members. They had practiced this greeting dozens of times, preparing formal speeches and ceremonial gifts. The airlock hissed open. Captain Jake Morrison stepped through, and Vec felt his world shift. These humans were small, much smaller than he had expected. Where Vec stood 7 feet tall with thick scales and natural armor plating. These creatures barely reached his chest. Their skin looked soft, almost fragile. No claws, no natural weapons, no protective shell, but their eyes, Vec had never seen eyes like these. Morrison's gaze swept across the assembled Kelvarans, like he was examining specimens. Cold, calculating, predatory in a way that made Vec's ancient instincts scream warnings. Behind him, 20 human soldiers filed in wearing black armor that somehow made them look even more dangerous. Ambassador Vec. Morrison's voice was casual, almost friendly. Captain Jake Morrison, Terran Defense Corps. We got your message. Captain Morrison, we are deeply grateful for your response. The situation is desperate. We have prepared detailed tactical briefings and Morrison held up one hand. Such a small gesture, but it cut through Vec's words like a blade. Skip the briefings. For now, I want to see these Ravagers myself. Lieutenant Alex Rodriguez stepped forward with a portable display unit. We intercepted your sensor feeds during the flight here. Fascinating creatures. Mind if we take a look? The display lit up with footage from the planet's surface. Ravager drones swarmed through the ruins of Crystal City, their mandibles clicking as they processed organic matter. Each insectoid stood 8 feet tall, with armored carapaces that could deflect plasma fire. Morrison watched with the same expression Vec might use when observing an interesting sunset. So these Ravagers, he said, never taking his eyes off the screen, they feel pain, right? The question sent ice through Vec's veins. Not how do we stop them, or what are their weaknesses. The human wanted to know if they could suffer. Sergeant Kelly Davis pulled up biological scans on another device. Standard nerve clusters visible here and here. Basic fear responses. Pain receptors throughout the limbs. This should be interesting. Interesting, Vec stammered. Captain, these creatures have destroyed 12 of our worlds. They've killed 40 billion of my people. They are not interesting. They are a plague that must be stopped. Morrison finally looked at him. That predator's gaze focused on Vec like he was prey, being evaluated. Oh, we'll stop them. Don't worry about that. How? Vec asked. The Vorthan Empire sent 200 warships. The Crystalline Confederacy used planet-killer weapons. Nothing has worked. The Ravagers adapt. They learn. They're not the first hive mind we've dealt with, interrupted Lieutenant David Chen, studying tactical displays. Though this neural network structure is more complex than usual, the Queen drone connection runs on biochemical signals transmitted through pheromone clouds. Vex stared at the human. How could you possibly know that? We've been studying them for months, and barely discovered pattern recognition, Morrison said with a shrug. You see enough species, you start noticing similarities. These Ravagers remind me of the Swarm Wars back home. Same basic setup, same weaknesses. Swarm Wars. Sela whispered. Morrison smiled, and Vec felt his blood freeze. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Let's just say Earth has some experience with pest control. The humans began setting up their equipment without asking permission. They moved with practiced efficiency, like they had done this many times before. Portable computers, biological scanners, weapons that didn't recognize. Captain, that said carefully, what exactly is your plan? Morrison was studying a three-dimensional map of the Ravager hive locations. Step 1 is intelligence gathering. We need live specimens for analysis. Step 2 is figuring out what makes them tick. Step 3, he looked up with that cold smile again. Step 3 is where it gets fun. Live specimens. Vec's voice cracked. You want to capture them alive, of course. Can't properly study something if it's dead. Rodriguez, prepare the collection teams. I want queens if possible, but workers will do for now. Lieutenant Rodriguez nodded. Should we set up the lab facilities, sir? Absolutely. Full biological analysis. I want to know everything about these creatures. How they think, how they feel, how they break. Vec realized he was shaking. These weren't saviors. These were something else entirely. Something that looked at the galaxy's most feared predators and saw research opportunities. Captain Morrison, he said slowly, what kind of species are you? Morrison paused in his work and looked at Deck with those terrifying eyes. The kind that other species call when they need monsters dealt with, Ambassador. The question is, are you sure you want our help? Deck stared at the humans setting up their equipment and wondered if he had just invited something worse than the Ravagers into his galaxy. Ambassador Vec expected the humans to request defensive positions around the remaining cities. Perhaps orbital bombardment coordinates, maybe evacuation routes for civilians. Instead, Captain Morrison pointed to a spot on the tactical map that made Dec's blood run cold. We'll set up base camp here, Morrison said casually, indicating a location deep in Ravager-controlled territory, the Red Zone, where no Calvaron had ventured in months and survived. That's impossible, Dec stammered. That sector is completely overrun. There are 3 major hive clusters within a 50-mile radius. No one can survive there. Morrison smiled that unsettling smile again. Perfect. Lots of specimens nearby. Within 6 hours, the humans had done the impossible. They landed their ships directly in the heart of enemy territory and began construction. Dec watched through long-range sensors as human soldiers worked, calmly while Ravager drones circled in the distance, as if the insects were afraid to get too close. The facility they built wasn't a military base. It looked more like a research station, prefabricated buildings with large windows, scientific equipment being unloaded by the crate. Most disturbing of all, structures that looked suspiciously like holding cells. Why aren't the Ravagers attacking? Sela asked, studying the sensor readings. They should be swarming that position. They're being smart, Thek replied. The Ravagers aren't mindless. They're watching, learning, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the attack never came. Instead, something far worse happened. The humans started hunting. Sergeant Kevin Lopez led the first expedition at dawn on the second day. They watched through orbital cameras as 12 human soldiers walked calmly into a Ravager patrol zone. They carried strange weapons that didn't look lethal. Net launchers, electrical devices, tranquilizer systems. The Ravagers spotted them immediately. A full war party of 20 drones converged on the human position, mandibles clicking with anticipation. These insects had torn through Kelvaron battle armor like paper. Their natural weapons could slice through reinforced steel. The fight lasted exactly 43 seconds. The humans moved like they were dancing. Every motion was precise, calculated. They avoided the Ravagers' attacks by inches, never seeming worried or afraid. When they struck back, it wasn't to kill, it was to disable, to capture. Within minutes, 6 Ravager drones lay twitching on the ground, wrapped in electromagnetic nets. The rest had fled in what looked suspiciously like panic. Impossible, Thek whispered. The Ravagers don't retreat. They don't know fear. They do now, Captain Morrison said from behind him. Thek spun around. The human had entered the observation deck without making a sound. How did you? Your security systems are interesting, but not very thorough. I wanted to show you something. Morrison activated a portable display, showing the inside of their research facility. Dr. Amanda Wells stood over a metal table, where one of the captured Ravager drones was strapped down. The creature's black eyes darted frantically as the human scientist made careful incisions in its carapace. The neural pathways are more complex than we initially thought, Dr. Wells said to her assistant. The pain responses trigger biochemical releases that travel directly to the hive mind network. Every drone can feel what this one feels. The rat on the table made a sound that chilled Thek to his core. Not just a scream of pain, but something that sounded almost like pleading. This is torture, Thek whispered, unable to look away from the screen. This is science, Morrison replied calmly. We're learning how their communication system works. Each nerve cluster we map gives us more data about their species. On the screen, Dr. Wells inserted a thin probe into the creature's head. The Ravager's struggles became more frantic. Interesting. The fear response creates a specific pheromone signature. If we could replicate this chemically, ... You're torturing a sentient being, Thek said, his voice shaking. This creature can think. It can feel. It has intelligence. Colonel Robert Turner looked up from his notes nearby. It also killed 40 billion of your people. Should we be more concerned about its feelings, or stopping the genocide of your species? Thek had no answer for that. He watched as the humans continued their work with the same emotional detachment a Kelvaron might show while repairing a machine. These creatures on the table had murdered his friends, his family. His entire civilization was dying because of them. But seeing them reduced to test subjects still made him sick. The fascinating part, Dr. Wells continued, is how the hive mind processes trauma. When one drone experiences extreme stress, it broadcasts that experience to every connected individual. It's like ... emotional contagion. So if we hurt this one, her assistant began. Every Ravager within 100 miles feels it too. They experienced the same fear, the same pain, the same helplessness. Morrison turned to Thek. Your people have been fighting the symptoms. We're attacking the disease. By tomorrow, every Ravager on this planet will know what it feels like to be prey instead of predator. Through the facility's speakers, the captured Ravagers' cries echoed across the complex. But there was something else in those sounds now. Something the Kelvarans had never heard from these creatures before. Terror. The hunt has begun, Ambassador, Morrison said quietly. And for the first time in their species' history, the Ravagers aren't the ones doing the hunting. The first sign something had changed came on day 4. Ambassador Thek was reviewing evacuation reports when his communication officer burst into the room, her blue scales pale with shock. Double quotes, "Sir, you need to see this. The Ravagers in Sector 7. They're fighting each other." Thek rushed to the observation deck. Through the long-range cameras, he watched something that should have been impossible. A group of Ravager drones had surrounded one of their own kind and were tearing it apart with their mandibles. The victim's screams echoed across the wasteland as its own species devoured it alive. "Run a biological scan," Thek ordered. "Check for diseases, parasites, something that might cause this behavior." The results came back clean. The attacking Ravagers showed no signs of illness or contamination. They were simply killing their own kind with the same brutal efficiency they had once used against Kelverans. Captain Morrison appeared beside him, as if materializing from thin air. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Wells managed to synthesize a modified version of their aggression pheromones. "We've been seeding it into their territory through aerosol dispensers. You made them turn on each other. Basic behavioral modification. Every species has chemical triggers that control their actions. We just needed to figure out which ones to push." Morrison watched the carnage below with scientific interest. The beauty is that they can't stop themselves. Their own biology is forcing them to attack anything that smells like prey. By day 6, entire hive clusters were destroying themselves from within. The humans had managed to weaponize the Ravagers' most basic instincts. But that was just the beginning. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cooper emerged from the research facility carrying what looked like a small speaker device. "Modified queen pheromones are ready for field testing," he announced cheerfully. "We took the mating call frequency and cranked it up about 300%. "What does that do?" Beck asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Drives them absolutely insane. Imagine hearing the most beautiful sound in the world, but so loud it makes your ears bleed. They can't resist following it, even when they know it's a trap." Cooper activated the device. Within minutes, Ravager drones began emerging from hiding spots across the continent. They moved in erratic patterns, stumbling and crashing into obstacles as they followed the irresistible call. Their movements became increasingly frantic as the sound continued. Thek watched in horrified fascination as hundreds of creatures that had once been the galaxy's most feared predators threw themselves off cliffs and into lava pits, following a sound their biology couldn't ignore. "This is madness," he whispered. "This is efficiency," Morrison replied. "Why fight them when we can make them fight themselves?" But the humans weren't content with just driving the creatures crazy from a distance. Staff Sergeant Kelly Roberts led daily expeditions deep into Ravager territory, hunting the most dangerous prey of all, breeding queens. Each queen controls about 10,000 drones through biochemical links, Roberts explained to her team, as they prepared for another mission. "Capture one alive, and we can map the entire command structure of their hive mind." These weren't search and destroy missions. These were collection operations. The humans went into the most heavily defended nests not to kill the queens, but to drag them out alive for study. Thek watched through helmet cameras as Roberts and her team infiltrated a massive hive complex. The queen they sought was a creature, the size of a small building, surrounded by thousands of warrior drones. Any sane species would have used orbital bombardment to level the entire area. Instead, Roberts walked calmly through the tunnels, using sonic disruptors to confuse the defenders and chemical agents to mask her team's scent. When they reached the queen's chamber, she didn't kill the massive creature. She sedated it. "Best way to understand something is to take it apart, piece by piece," she explained cheerfully as they dragged the unconscious queen toward their transport. "And we have so many questions to ask." The captured queens were taken back to the research facility, where Dr. Wells and her team conducted what they called behavioral analysis. Beck learned not to ask too many questions about what that meant. The sounds coming from the laboratory told him everything he needed to know. Within days of each queen's capture, her entire hive would begin displaying signs of extreme psychological distress. Drones would stop eating, workers would abandon their tasks. Entire colonies would simply shut down as their captured leaders' suffering was transmitted directly into their minds. The fascinating thing about hive minds, Dr. Wells explained during one of her reports, is that trauma spreads like a virus. Hurt the queen badly enough, and every connected creature experiences that same pain simultaneously. The Ravagers had become something they had never been in millions of years of evolution. Victims. Their own biology, their own instincts, their own social structure had been turned against them. The apex predators of a dozen star systems were now running in terror from creatures half their size. But as Thek watched the systematic destruction of a species that had once seemed invincible, he began to understand something that chilled him more than any Ravager attack ever had. The humans weren't just winning this war, they were enjoying it. They studied their enemies with the same enthusiasm a child might show when taking apart a toy. They turned mass destruction into a science experiment. And when this was over, they would take everything they had learned and carry it with them to the next species that needed their help. The silence was the first thing Ambassador Thek noticed. After months of constant Ravager screams echoing across the planet, the sudden quiet felt unnatural, wrong somehow. He stood on his observation deck, scanning the surface of Calvara Prime through his scope. Where massive hive complexes had sprawled across entire continents just weeks ago, now only empty craters remained. Not damaged, not abandoned, completely erased, as if they had never existed at all. Final sweep complete, announced Lieutenant David Chen through the communication system. 0 Ravager life signs detected across all 12 worlds. 0 eggs, 0 larvae, 0 genetic traces in the soil samples. Vec felt a chill run through his scales. 0 genetic traces. What does that mean? Captain Morrison materialized beside him, that predatory smile never leaving his face. It means we were thorough, Ambassador. Can't risk them coming back from a few surviving cells, can we? But that's impossible. Even after a nuclear bombardment, some biological material always survives. DNA fragments, cellular remnants, something. Not when you know what you're doing. Morrison held up a small device that looked like a medical scanner. Genetic dissolution agent. Breaks down organic compounds at the molecular level. We've been spraying it over every former hive site for the past week. The horror of it hit Thek like a physical blow. You didn't just kill them, you erased them from existence. Standard protocol for hive mind species. Leave nothing behind that. Could regenerate. Trust me, we've learned from experience. Dr. Amanda Wells joined them, carrying a thick datapad filled with biological readings. The extinction protocol worked perfectly. We managed to catalog 17 different Ravager subspecies before elimination. The neural pathway variations alone will keep our research teams busy for years. 17 subspecies, Thek whispered. We only knew about 4. You weren't looking hard enough, Wells replied cheerfully. The deep cave variants were particularly interesting. Enhanced sensory organs, modified digestive systems, fascinating adaptations. Morrison produced a small data chip from his pocket and handed it to Thek. Complete biological profile of every Ravager variant we encountered. Detailed genetic maps, behavioral patterns, weaknesses, reproduction cycles, everything. Vex stared at the innocent-looking device in his palm. Why are you giving me this? Just in case something similar shows up. Galaxy's a big place. Lots of species out there that might develop comparable threat levels. This data could save you time if you need to deal with them. The casual way Morrison spoke about future genocides made Thek's stomach turn. You plan to do this again? Only if we're asked, Morrison said with a shrug. Though I have to admit, This was educational. We've updated our xenobiology databases considerably, added some new techniques to our arsenal. Staff Sergeant Kelly Roberts approached, carrying a collection of metal containers. Final specimen samples are ready for transport, sir. Queen neural tissue, worker, pheromone glands, warrior combat, stimulants. The whole package. Excellent work, Sergeant. Load them onto the research vessel. Dek watched the humans pack up their equipment with the same mechanical efficiency they had shown throughout the entire operation. 2 months ago, the Ravagers had been an unstoppable force that had consumed 12 worlds. Today, they were nothing more than data files and tissue samples. Captain Morrison, Dek said slowly, what kind of galaxy do you come from? What made your species so, effective at this? Morrison paused in his equipment check and looked at Dek with those cold, calculating eyes. Earth is what we call a Deathworld ambassador. Everything there tries to kill everything else. For millions of years, we had to be better at killing than anything that wanted to kill us. But the Ravagers weren't from your world. They were alien to you. Doesn't matter. Predator is predator. Prey is prey. The methods change, but the principles stay the same. Morrison gestured toward the empty landscape below. Your species never learned to think like killers. You're builders. Creators. That's admirable, but it also made you helpless when real killers showed up. The human ships began launching from the surface, sleek metal forms rising into the atmosphere with loaded cargo bays. Dek realized they were taking samples of everything, not just Ravager specimens, but Kelvaron technology, biological samples, from their world, detailed scans of their cities. What will you do with all that data? He asked. File it away. You never know when information might be useful. Morrison smiled that terrifying smile again. This was a good learning experience. We hope we run into more problems like this soon. Problems? Dek's voice cracked. You mean other species facing extinction? I mean other interesting species? To study. The galaxy is full of life, Ambassador. So many different ways that evolution can develop. So many unique biological systems to analyze. The last transport lifted off, leaving behind a world that was finally safe. The Kelvaron refugees could return home. Their cities could be rebuilt. Their culture could survive and flourish again. But as Dek watched the human fleet form up in orbit, he felt a growing dread that had nothing to do with the departed Sir, Sela said quietly from her communication station. I've been monitoring their transmissions. They're not heading home. Where are they going? Unknown. But they've been scanning long-range communication frequencies. They're looking for more distress signals. Dek stared at the human ships as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. In 2 months, they had solved a problem that had seemed impossible. They had saved his species from certain extinction. They were heroes. So why did he feel like he had just watched the birth of something far worse than anything the Ravagers had ever been? The human fleet disappeared into the stars, carrying their samples and their data and their newfound knowledge of how to efficiently exterminate entire species. Somewhere out there, another civilization was probably sending out desperate pleas for help, offering their treasures to anyone willing to save them. And now the humans knew those signals existed. They knew the galaxy was full of species waiting to be studied, to be catalogued, to be helped. Dek clutched the data chip in his trembling hand and wondered if he had just witnessed the end of the Ravager threat, or the beginning of something infinitely more dangerous. The death world called Earth had sent its children into the stars, and they had learned that the universe was full of interesting prey.